Miss Hamilton, Miss Hannah, Mr. Henriquez, Mr. Henry, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Davis, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Lawrence, Miss Lee, Mr. Miller, Mr. Montague, Miss Morrison, Mrs. Nita Garvey, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Siblist, Mr. Slowly, Mrs. Vaz, Dr. Wheatley, Mr. Williams, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Wright. Nobody came in?
Want to welcome everybody to the sitting of Parliament today. Want to welcome those, there's nobody I'm seeing in the gallery as yet, but those joining us online by various social media platforms. We want to welcome you all and trust this will be an informative sitting of Parliament. Want to start, House Leader, with statements by ministers, and the Minister of Legal Affairs and Constitution is here. So there are two of them. There are two statements, but I don't see the other. Just before the Minister makes her presentation, may I make a special welcome to persons joining us in the gallery. Two very important ladies are here, and I know they are here for a very important matter this afternoon. We welcome you and happy to have you.
I think this one needs to be pushed in. Madam Speaker, this ministerial statement is intended to provide an update to this Honourable House and to the people of Jamaica on the implementation of new arrangements to improve the legislative review process and the progress of legislation for the 2022-23 legislative year. Madam Speaker, the Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs has been mandated to address the slow pace of legal reform in the public sector. Since its establishment in January of this year, the Ministry has been working assiduously to improve operational efficiency, speed, and the quality of legislation promulgated across government. The work is largely behind the scene and outside of the public glare. And I know many may be wondering what is happening, but so technical is the nature of the work that it really cannot properly be done in full view. Madam Speaker, the Ministry has adopted a projectized and collaborative approach to achieve better results. The legislative review process has been affected by delays, culminating in critical pieces of legislation neither being amended, repealed and replaced, nor developed and subsequently passed in a timely manner. The situation is exacerbated by the paucity of human resources in some ministries, coupled with the crafting of ambitious legislative targets prior to the start of each financial year. Some targets which encompass in strategic and operational plans were encompassed in strategic and operational plans, the annual legislation program, and in various throne speeches, and they are not accorded priority and the concomitant dedication and focus by some ministries, departments, and agencies. Over the years, Madam Speaker, it has been observed that after the throne speech has been delivered, there was usually delay in some ministries sending the necessary instructions. The Office of Parliamentary Counsel is particularly affected by the current situation because it is at the end of the legislative production chain. Madam Speaker, in 2020, Cabinet identified a number of issues which affected the legislative process, and those issues are still with us. Among them are inadequate or unclear drafting instructions from ministries to the Office of the Parliamentary Counsel, as well as the inordinate length of time taken for bills to move between the key entities, in particular, the Attorney General's Chambers, the Office of Parliamentary Counsel, and the ministries during the drafting process. Also, inadequate policy direction by ministries to the Attorney General's Chambers and the Office of Parliamentary Counsel. The need for better communication among key stakeholders, ministries not properly addressing concerns raised by the Attorney General's Chambers in their comments on Cabinet submissions and on bills, ministries being tardy in responding to final draft bills forwarded to them by the Office of the Parliamentary Counsel. Comments of the Attorney General's Chambers on legislative Cabinet submissions were rarely sought and secured in keeping with guidelines for Cabinet submissions. Also identified among issues affecting the work was a need for a filter mechanism for quality control of legislative Cabinet submissions and drafting instructions. Portfolio ministers also needed to improve their responsibility for the legislative aspects of their portfolio.
I hate to do this, but we, at this point, do not have a copy of the statement by the minister. The opposition leader is the person who will respond, and we definitely can't proceed without a copy of the statement.
Member, do you have a copy of your statement? We have to.
Madam Speaker, it's not obligatory for her to, any minister, make an estimate to give to a position. It's only a courtesy extended. There's no way in a standing order that requires that. It's up to the minister who wants to so do. There's nowhere that requires that. So it cannot be demanded. House Leader, I'm speaking. Am I incorrect?
No, Madam Speaker, with your permission, on a point of order, the minister did in fact try to get the statement to the House by way of a... Please. Right, so, Madam Speaker, to recognize the fact that indeed the courtesy is always extended, and that this courtesy is going to be extended, but for the technological glitch that we had, and that report should be here in short order. It's being typed, and I ask for the indulgence of the members on the other side while the typed statement gets to the Honourable House. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, as the House Leader indicated, the statement was sent electronically. There appears to be just some technical glitches. Madam Speaker, as I was saying before the pause, that a number of issues affecting the legislative process were identified and are reflected in a decision of the Cabinet of September 28, 2020. Among those issues are the need for greater prioritization of legislation, guided by the throne speech and the government's priority legislation program, and the need for ministers and their permanent secretaries to be more active in ensuring that the legislative matters return to the office of the Parliamentary Council in a timely manner. Madam Speaker, with a view to improving the process, my ministry made a submission to the Cabinet in June of this year, proposing the introduction of a new system, and the decisions of the Cabinet are reflected in number 20 of 2022, dated June 6, 2022. Cabinet had granted approval for the establishment of a legislative team in each ministry to include the relevant policy officers, relevant legal officers, relevant senior officers at the level of Chief Technical Director, Principal Director or Senior Director, responsible for working closely with the relevant policy and legal officers to provide oversight of each ministry's legislation program as part of the work to strengthen inter-ministry collaboration to advance the government's legislative agenda. Madam Speaker, I'm happy to report to this Honourable House and to the people of Jamaica that progress has been made in implementing the decisions approved by Cabinet. All ministries have established their legislative team, and my ministry has started to work with them. The inaugural meeting of the government-wide legislative teams was convened on September 9, 2022, in a full face-to-face meeting to enable the ministry, among other things, to meet the respective officers and provide details on the new arrangements. My ministry has gone further since then to convene meetings with the permanent secretaries and the legislative teams of each ministry to review the progress of priority legislation encompassed in the 2022-23 legislation programme and the throne speech, to discuss strategies to accelerate the pace of reform for outstanding legislation, and also ahead, we have begun our discussion on the legislative priorities for 2023-2024. Further meetings have been convened with the Office of the Prime Minister, the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, the Ministry of Education and Youth, and the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology. The meetings for the other ministries are scheduled over the course of this month of December 2022. Madam Speaker, the ministry now requires priority legislation to include subsidiary legislation, that is, the regulations, and also for the priority set out to deal with proposal to increase outdated fines and penalties. And I think the criticality of including subsidiary legislation was brought home with the Road Traffic Act and the road traffic regulations. And everyone who has been monitoring that lamented the inordinately long time it took for the regulations to be promulgated after the Road Traffic Act was passed into law. All ministries, Madam Speaker, have been furnished with pieces of legislation by my ministry which contain fines and penalties which need to be reviewed, and some ministries have already begun to prepare cabinet submissions for the approval of drafting instructions to effect the changes. Madam Speaker, a projectized approach has been introduced, which now require all ministries to work within settled time frames. An agile, hand-holding approach has been adopted by my ministry to ensure that support to the other ministries is responsive and effective. Each piece of legislation being amended or developed, if new, is being treated as a project and managed in accordance with established project management principles. The process involves the development of the project's scope, schedule, risk, and risk responses. Madam Speaker, legislative policy development has been identified as one of the major weaknesses in the government. If the policy is not cogently expressed, it is likely to affect the quality of the related cabinet submission and the drafting instructions to the Chief Parliamentary Council. With a view to closing this gap, my ministry is seeking to introduce a training program to build the capacity of officers in this area. It is projected that this training course will be implemented in the first quarter of the 23-24 financial year. Madam Speaker, I now turn my attention to the progress of legislation contained in the 2022-23 legislation programme, as highlighted in the Governor-General's throne speech delivered in February of this year. Madam Speaker, a total of 28 specific items of legislation were identified in the throne speech. 7, that's 25%, have been enacted to date. And these are the Bank of Jamaica Amendment Act, the Natural Resources Conservation Authority Cockpit Country Protected Area Order, the Road Traffic Fixed Penalty Notice Regulations, Firearms Prohibition, Restriction and Regulations Act, the Dangerous Drugs, Cannabis Import, Export, Transit and Transshipment Regulations, the Road Traffic Regulations, the Transport Authority Amendment Act. Of the remaining 21 specific items, the Office of Parliamentary Counsel has drafted 19 instruments in relation to them. These are as follows: the Insolvency Amendment Bill, the Insolvency Amendment Regulations.
The Minister's time for speaking has expired.
Madam Speaker, in keeping with the established tradition, I beg to move that the member's time be extended by 5 minutes to allow her to complete her presentation. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
The question before the House is that the Minister's time for completion be extended by 5 minutes. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, I was advising the House that 19 instruments have been drafted in relation to the 21 remaining legislative matters. I indicated the Insolvency Amendment Bill, the Insolvency Amendment Regs, the Bail Bill, the Domestic Violence Amendment Bill, the Human Services Bill, the Building Enforcement of Notices and Orders Regulations, the National Solid Waste Management Amendment Bill, the National Solid Waste Management Disposal of Hazardous Waste, Solid Waste Management Disposal of Solid Waste Facilities Regulations, the National Solid Waste Management Public Cleansing Regulations, the National Solid Waste Management Fixed Penalty Regulations, the Custom Bills, the Enhanced Security Measures Bill, the Jamaica Teaching Council Bill, the Education Amendment Bill, the Child Care and Protection Amendment Bill, the Plant Health Bill, the Agricultural Produce Amendment Bill, the Companies Amendment Bill. Madam Speaker, I have attached to this statement in written form a table which sets out in detail the various stages of the legislative work on these matters. The the time allocated to me for completion of the statement does not allow me to go into it, but it has been shared and will go on the record. Madam Speaker, there are other matters which were mentioned in the throne speech which required legislative work, although no specific legislation was identified. And having regard to the work required, the Office of Parliamentary Counsel prepared a number of legislative measures in support. And these cover orders and resolution to support continuation or declaration, as the case may be, of zones of special operations under the Law Reform Zone of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures Act, proclamations for states of public emergency and supporting regulations and continuance resolutions, orders under the Disaster Risk Management Act and the Public Health Act in respect of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Food and Drug COVID-19 Vaccine Emergency Use Authorization Exemption Regulations, Public Health SARS-CoV-19 Vaccination Regulations, the Tobacco Control Bill, the Custom Tariff Revision Amendment Resolution. Madam Speaker, the Office of Parliamentary Counsel also prepared a draft legislation in respect of a variety of other matters not mentioned in the throne speech. Over the period April 1, 2022 to November 30, 2022, the OCP completed approximately 233 matters referred to it for drafting or for the provision of comments or advice. Drafting support is also provided through attendance at sittings of Parliament, including sittings of Joint Select Committees and at the Legislation Committee of Cabinet. In concluding, Madam Speaker, moving forward, a realistic legislation programme must be crafted each year, having regard to the capacity of some ministries, the heavy demand placed on my ministry, particularly regarding requests for comments by the Legal Reform Department, and the actual drafting of bills by the Office of Parliamentary Counsel. My ministry pledges its commitment to working closely with all ministries to accelerate the pace of reform. Already, Madam Speaker, we have begun to do periodic evaluation ahead of the end of the current legislative year to determine progress, weaknesses, and lessons learned. Data gathered will facilitate adjustments prior to the commencement of the next legislative year. Madam Speaker, following timely periodic updates to the Cabinet, my ministry will also provide similar periodic updates to this Honourable House and the people of Jamaica on the progress of the performance of the legislative review process, and this statement is doing just that. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, I thank the Minister for her presentation. The issue of the preparation of legislation, of which drafting is only part of the process. There's much more to it than drafting. So the general preparation of legislation in Jamaica to allow government to respond on a timely basis to things that emerge, that require legislative intervention, to fix or update laws that have become outdated or otherwise no longer fit for purpose. And so these are critical parts of governance. And Jamaica has been struggling with it for quite a long time. When I was Minister of Justice, significant effort was put into training persons in the public sector, key officials within ministries, departments, and agencies, to give them a better understanding of the process of developing legislation, in particular the process for developing policy documents and drafting instructions for legislation, because the drafters in the Office of Parliamentary Counsel will tell you that their work is made much more efficient and simpler in a sense if they get fulsome but well-constructed, well-thought-through drafting instructions. What happens too often is that the difficult and thorny issues are avoided by the policymakers and left to the drafters to think through the gaps in the instructions they're given. And this is often conducive of delay because it requires further input on whatever ultimate approach is taken in the draft to these issues. And we find legislation that remains in the pipeline of development, sometimes for years on end. When I was minister, I had to take a very hands-on approach to legislative development and the delivery of legislation to Parliament. We were at the time in a very exacting IMF program, which had numerous time-bound structural benchmarks, most of which involved the delivery of legislation across a wide range of areas in the economy in particular, from taxation reform, customs reform, commercial architecture, things like insolvency, secured lending and the system for taking security interest in personal property, and a whole lot more. And in order to deliver on those things on time so that we passed all the tests, it had to be very carefully managed, and it had to be managed in a very hands-on and proactive way. And I must say how much I appreciate the willingness and dedication of the public servants who worked with me on that, especially those in the Ministry of Justice at the time and the various departments within the ministry, including legal reform, the Attorney General's chambers, and of course the Office of Parliamentary Counsel. Anything that can be done to make this area of government more efficient and effective is to be welcomed. And so I hope that these announcements will bear some fruit. The government's record, I think, in this area it leaves much to be desired. I believe that they need to step up their game in this area, and I look forward to seeing the output to match what we have been told here. I would add that there are some things that I think need to be done. It can't just be an improvement of processes, as important as that is. And I do think that the improvement of processes is well worth the effort. I do believe it can yield significant efficiencies and improvements. But overall, there are some deficiencies in the system which require change. For example, the number of drafters that we have. Yes.
Leader, you're 10 minutes. In fact, I got a little distracted. You're 3 minutes over your 5 minutes allotted under the standing orders.
I'm sorry, I've never been told that before.
Yes, the standing orders. Yes, 11.
Yeah, I'm not disputing it. Yeah.
Madam Speaker, we have been maintaining this discipline, opposition leader, and if you notice, the minister got exactly 12 minutes and then 5 minutes afterwards. So the reply is always 5 minutes and possibly a minute or so to wrap up. So I would ask Madam Speaker that the Leader of the Opposition be allowed to wrap up his presentation.
Thank you, House Leader.
The question before the House is that the Leader of the Opposition be given the minutes indicated by House Leader to wrap up his presentation. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, House Leader. I will not be long. The areas of deficiency which are more structural are, A, the number of drafters we have in the system. I think if you were to compare the number of professional drafters in the public service as a per capita of the population, Jamaica is quite significantly underserved relative to other Commonwealth countries, for example. I remember visiting Botswana for a law ministers' conference and speaking to their chief parliamentary counsel there, who indicated to me that she had over 30 drafters in her department. And at the time, we had less than 20, and we are a much bigger population than Botswana. And, you know, it's not just acts of parliament that require professional drafting. There's subsidiary legislation, the regulations and other orders. And there are all sorts of other aspects of things, numerous tax-related instruments that have to be prepared and gazetted, and which need to be properly done. If they're not properly done, then you end up collecting tax which is not properly authorized. You have to bring legislation here to validate that era, which wastes parliamentary time, wastes drafters' time, wastes everybody's time. So those resources are very important, and we need to, I think, put some more emphasis on that area. In the area of law reform, sorry, Minister, but in the area of law reform, we need to expand the law, the Legal Reform Department into a full-fledged law commission, which can really do the work of focusing on the laws that exist, where they're outdated, where they need updating, a mechanism for automatically updating laws, which is something I was working on but still doesn't exist, and new laws that we ought to have, and can track also the provisions in legislation that require parliamentary review of acts which have passed within a period of time, many of them knowing that they're experimental or in need of further review, have provisions that require Parliament to review them within 3 to 5 years usually. And often that period of time elapses and passes and the reviews are not done by Parliament. We have a couple instances right now, the security interest in personal property legislation, the insolvency legislation. Those are fat, meaty, difficult, but very critical pieces of legislation which ought to have been reviewed and have not been. And the other area, I think, where we need to...
You are wrapping up now because you're gone 10 minutes over your 5 minutes.
The law commissioners, law revision commissions are responsible for making sure that the laws of Jamaica are properly compiled and that amendments that have been made are in the law, put into the laws on a timely basis and are accurate, reflective, that the Consolidated Act with the amendments in them have been properly done. It's a very critical behind-the-scenes activity, very arcane. Many people aren't even aware of its existence, but it is vital. And I think, that is also an area where we need to see some modernization. The Minister's indicated that she's bringing something here on that. So those are my comments on this issue. I thank the Minister for bringing it to the fore. This is something dear to my heart and very, very important, I think, if Jamaica is to move forward. Thank you.
Very well.
Madam Speaker, the issues to be addressed are really not contentious. They just need to be done. The Leader of Opposition mentioned the insolvency law. He would have heard my reference to both the Insolvency Amendment Bill and the Insolvency Amendment Regulations as two of the instruments that have been drafted and are at different stage. They were listed in the throne speech. And just to say that the issue of the complement, yes. Madam Speaker, there's a lot of work to be done. And like I say, members of the public will wonder what exactly is happening. This is technical work. It's not the populist, sexy kind of work that you speak about. It's hardcore work. And a lot has taken place since the ministry has been established to just take stock and to sort out what needs to be done. As I take my seat, I just want to say that the resources was something that was discussed yesterday in the Cabinet, including expanding the number of draftsmen. And the Cabinet is in unanimous agreement that this is an area that we have to address. I indicated that I just came back from the Commonwealth Law Ministers meeting. The Leader of Opposition referenced his attendance at one of them, and I too had discussions around assistance to Jamaica in the area of drafters and legislative work. And the Chief Parliamentary Council will take up that with her counterpart, the President of the Legislative Affairs Commission. So we really are on track to improve in a significant way. It will take time and the results will not be immediately obvious because the focus is not just on the quantity of legislation turned out, but on the quality of the work, and at the same time ensuring that capacity is built within government to do the work at the required standard. Like I say, Madam Speaker, the Parliament will be kept abreast on the work being done. I thank the opposition leader for his gracious comments.
Thank you very much. We're going to Mr. Samuel. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following: the Jamaica second supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 2023, monetary policy statement dated August 20, 2022, supported by the quarterly monthly policy reports dated May 2022, volume 22, number 4, and the quarterly monthly policy report dated August 2022, volume 23, number 1. Report of investigation in the failure of Mr. Horace Daly, a former member of Parliament, to file a statutory declaration with the Commission. White paper number 3 of 2022, entitled National Investment Policy. White paper number 4, 2022, entitled National Population and Sustainable Development Policy, Jamaica. Ministry paper number 93 of 2022, entitled Annual Report of the Administrator General's Department for the financial year 2020-2021. Ministry paper number 94 of 2022, entitled Report on the Appropriation Accounts Auditor General's Department for the financial year 2020-2021. Ministry paper number 95 of 2022, entitled National Population and Sustainable Development Policy. Ministry papers numbers 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, and 102 respectively, with respect to the law reform zones of special operations, special security and community development measures. 1, the August Town Community Zone Social Intervention. 2, the Greenwich Town Community Zone Social Intervention. 3, the Denham Town Community Zone Social Intervention. 4, the Mount Salem Community Zone Social Intervention. 5, the Norwood Community Zone Social Intervention. 6, the Savannah Mar Zone Social Intervention, and the Parade Gardens Zone Social Intervention, and their respective orders and resolutions under the Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures Act 2017. Annual report on audited financial statements of the Port Authority of Jamaica for the financial year 2020-2021. The Independent Commission of Investigations report reflecting the period January to March 2022, April to June 2022, and July to September 2022. The Charities Regulations 2022 resolution under the Charities Act and its regulations. The Jamaica Gazette Supplement, Proclamations, Rule and Regulations, Volume 145, number 297, dated Tuesday, December 6, 2022, containing the emergency powers parishes of St. Anne, Clarendon, and St. Catherine Regulations 2022, and the Jamaica Gazette Supplement, Proclamations, Rules and Regulations, number 145, number 298, dated Tuesday, December 6, 2022, containing the emergency powers parishes of St. James, Westmoreland, and Hanover Regulations 2022.
Petitions, bills brought from the Senate, petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally.
Madam Speaker, first, maybe I'd love to speak from a seat other than my own, even if it's temporary today. Thank you. Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice at the next meeting of the House, I will move the following motion, following under the law reform, the Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures Act 2017. 1. The law reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the August Town Extension of Period of Operation. Number 6, Order 2022 Resolution. Number 2, the law reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Greenwich Town Zone Extension of Period of Operation. Number 6, Order Resolution 2022. 3, the law reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Denham Town Community Zone, Extension of Period of Operation. Number 6, Order Resolution 2022. Number 4, the law reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Mount Salem Community and Environment in the Parish of St. James Zone, the Extension of Period of Operation. Number 6, Order 2022 Resolution. 5, the law reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Norwood Community in the Parish of St. James, Extension of Period of Operation. Number 6, Order Resolution 2022. Number 6, the law reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Parade Gardens Zone of Extension of Period of Operation. Number 6, Order 2022 Resolution. Number 7, the law reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Sablamal Zone Extension of Period of Operation. Number 6, Order 2022 Resolution, which were all laid on the table on December 6, 2022. Madam Speaker, they're here. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I'll move the following motion. Be it resolved that the monetary policy statement dated August 2022, supported by the quarterly monetary policy report, May 2022, volume 22, number 4, and the quarterly monetary policy report, August 2022, volume 23, number 1, which were laid on the table of the House of Representatives on the 6th day of December 2022, be referred to the Standing Finance Committee for consideration and report. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I'll move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion. Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the Charities Act, the Charities Regulation 2022 Resolution. Whereas Section 38, subsection 1 of the Charities Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, provides that the Minister may, after consultation with the Charities Authority, make regulation for the purpose of giving effect to the objects and provisions of the Act, and, without prejudice to the generality of the foregoing, the regulations may, among other things, contain provisions in relation to A, guidelines for the proper operation of charitable organizations, B, the protection of charitable organizations from being used for money laundering, the financing of terrorism or other financial crimes, and C, the requirement for registered charitable organizations to use their best efforts to confirm the identity, credentials, and good standing of persons who provide them with financial contributions and other donations, including documenting the identity of their significant donors while respecting donor confidentiality. Persons to which registered charitable organizations provide financial support or other benefits, and persons with which registered charitable organizations collaborate in carrying out their charitable purpose. And whereas subsection 3 of the said section 38 of the Act provides that regulations made under subsection 1 shall be made subject to affirmative resolution, and whereas the Minister, after consultation with the Charities Authority, on the 2nd day of November 2022, made the Charities Regulation 2022, and whereas it is desirable that the Charities Regulation 2022 be affirmed, now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. 1. This resolution may be cited as the Charities Resolution 2022, Charities Regulation 2022 Resolution, and 2. The Charities Regulation 2022 are hereby affirmed. Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice at the next meeting of the House. I'll move the following motion. Be it resolved that the second supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2023, and the Jamaica Public Body's second supplementary estimates of expenditure of revenue, estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 31st, 2023, which were laid on the table of the House on the 6th day of December 2022, be referred to the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee of the House of Representatives for consideration and report. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I'll move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Questions and answers to questions. Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to sittings of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without the leave of the House first obtained. Public business.
Madam Speaker, on the matter of public business today, the Deputy Prime Minister, should I say the Acting Prime Minister, will carry through the motions in relation to the zones of special operations for the various areas which he outlined earlier on, and the Minister of Finance will take the motion in relation to the supplementary estimates, and the Minister of Entertainment, Sports, and Gender and Culture will make her presentation with regards to the resolution under her name. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
House Leader, the last shall be the first, and we'll start with the Minister of Gender. And I did welcome the very special ladies sitting in the gallery with us, but I just want at the beginning of the Minister's presentation to reference them by name, Senator Natalie Campbell Rodriguez, and also welcome former Senator Barbara Blake to the well of this Parliament. And they're here to support, like all of us, the discussions now to be carried out by the Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise today in furtherance of a motion that I placed before this Honourable House in May 2021, which sought that the standing orders of the House of Representatives be amended to allow for the bicameral caucus of women parliamentarians to be established as a sessional select committee to sit jointly with a similarly comprised committee of the Senate. Madam Speaker, our lone heroine, Queen Nanny of the Maroons, was the leader of one of the most successful and tenacious incidences of resistance conducted in the Western Hemisphere. So powerful was her resistance that her name appeared in the British archives, thus leading to her designation as National Heroine of Jamaica in 1975. And then there was the Honourable Louise Bennett Coverley, who fought to give credence to the language created by our Jamaican people as an element of their identity and purpose.
This single act provided a platform on which Jamaican people could reclaim our identity and place within the world, with Jamaica now being seen as one of the most powerful brands in the world. Madam Speaker, Iris Rodella Collins, a Jamaican businesswoman who ran for the Jamaica Labour Party, was elected to this House of Representatives in 1944, becoming the first female member of Parliament, thus opening the door for us, for all of us as women in this Parliament today. Madam Speaker, Enid Bennett, Madam Rose Leon, Dr. Mavis Gilmore, and our first female Prime Minister, the Most Honorable Portia Simpson Miller. We stand on their shoulders. Our country's existence is testament to women finding agency to effect change in their communities, to bring about positive change to the affairs of the general population. And we are proud to be women. Madam Speaker, recently we completed the shortlisting of Phase 1 of the Prime Minister's Diamond Jubilee Awards, which will award 30 women who have done significantly well in developing Jamaica as one of the celebratory activities under the Jamaica 60 celebrations. But Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister will not just honor 30 women in January, he will also honor 30 men. Because it's about partnership. It's about ensuring that we have gender equality. In total, Madam Speaker, 60 men and 60 women will be honored. But Phase 1 will be in January. On the 20th of January, we will have that event. I'm pleased to report that Jamaica's first woman Prime Minister, the Most Honorable Portia Simpson Miller, and Dr. Mavis Gilmore, former Minister of Education and Member of Parliament for St. Andrew West Rural, will be receiving special awards for their contribution to more than 7 of the 15 priority areas that are used to select nominated Jamaicans for their contributions to Jamaica's national development. And those
men, Minister, the men can clap in support of what's happening for the women too. It's so feeble. We need your support.
Madam Speaker, those areas, those 7 of the 15 priority areas fall under Jamaica's National Development Plan, the Beijing Platform for Action and Sustainable Development Goals. And it is a proud legacy of women such as the Most Honorable Mrs. Portia Simpson Miller and Dr. Gilmore, that we the women in Parliament, conscious of the role we play in leading transformational change for women across the board in this country, have been prepared to bridge all political divides as part of our efforts to work for the betterment of women in Jamaica. So we are proud of the large number of women who now participate actively in the political life of our nation, and are assured that it will only be meaningful to all women if we are prepared when the occasion arises to bridge the partisan divide and caucus together for the rights, freedoms, and upward mobility of our women and our country. Madam Speaker, as a country, we can be pleased with the work we have put in on the various policy areas facing women and development. We're pleased to support the commitments of the guiding principles in the national policy for gender equality, which I was proud to take to Cabinet in 2011. The Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, the Inter-American Convention on the Prevention, Punishment, and Eradication of Violence Against Women, the Convention and the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, particularly regarding the issue of enabling gender equality in the Jamaican society. This was never a natural occurrence, Madam Speaker. Of course, in getting there, we opened up a deeper dialogue with our male counterparts. We understood as women that our development may not be seen as competition with our men. We're not in competition. In fact, it was about initiating a dialogue centered in partnership, one that understood that the best form of advancement for women would only come with the expressed willingness of our men, hence the dialogue. As such, the Bureau of Women's Affairs was changed under my watch to the Bureau of Gender Affairs, with all the trappings that ensure that all our policies and programs are mindful of the need to create a social and political landscape of mutual respect, acceptance, free and fair competition, even as we still negotiate for equal pay for equal work and fully accessing spaces of authority. Madam Speaker, as women who are in the House, we are held to a greater responsibility to ensure that the needs of our girls and women in society are reflected in the legislative agenda in the country. The journey of meeting as women across the chambers have already yielded outcomes. For instance, as a core, we have all agreed on the following objectives coming out of a caucus which we had over the weekend. 1, to facilitate networking, build solidarity, and promote constructive dialogue on issues of importance among women parliamentarians across party lines and chambers. 2, provide caucus members with professional development opportunities to further strengthen their leadership and their capacities to participate in the legislative process in a gender-responsive manner. 3, raise awareness on gender equality and the importance of women's leadership among all parliamentarians and parliamentary staff, as well as among the general public, including by raising the visibility of women leaders in all spheres and sectors of society. 4, support capacity building, Madam Speaker, across the Parliament in gender mainstreaming and gender responsive budgeting and costing, and to encourage application of these tools in parliamentary work. 5, undertaking reviews of select legislation from a gender perspective to understand their impact on gender equality themes. 6, engaging in advocacy and lobbying on specific priority policy themes to be identified on a periodic basis in accordance with national needs and outlined in the caucus's work plan. Madam Speaker, one issue of concern for us as women in the House, which was addressed in our retreat that was held over the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, and I won't tell you it was on the North Coast, is that of domestic violence which has left a stain on gender relations over the years. Madam Speaker, violence against women and girls have had injurious effects on the society. The direct costs include funding health, police, courts, shelter, counseling, and legal aid services, and indirect costs related to loss of income due to missed work, missed school days by the children, lost time on the labor market, lost productivity and earnings, consumption loss, as well as pain and suffering, and loss of quality of life. So, Madam Speaker, in short order, I intend to present to Cabinet the findings from the study, The Economic Cost of Violence Against Women. This study was commissioned by the UN Women and highlights the importance of ending violence against women and girls with legislation, plans, and programs, and the need to allocate the necessary budgetary support, Mr. Finance Minister, to fund initiatives to address violence against women and girls and to provide quality, essential services to survivors and their children. And I must use the opportunity to again thank the Minister of Finance for not just giving us the funds for one shelter, but he provided us with the funds for a national shelter and 2 regional shelters. As reflected in the joint statement coming out of our retreat in Ocherias, St. Anne over the weekend, we are prepared to work together. As women, we are prepared to work together, regardless of partisan lines. We are committed to creating a space for the deliberation of women's rights, for lobbying for the social and economic improvement of our women, and for the promotion of a society in which women and girls are protected. And, Madam Speaker, if we are taken care of, we will ensure we take care of our boys and our men. Madam Speaker, I wish to acknowledge and thank the Most Honorable Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, and our male counterparts for their support. I know we can count on them. Additionally, yes, the Deputy Prime Minister is applauding and I don't see the other men applauding. We know we can count on you. Additionally, I wish to thank you and women, Parliamenters, the Bureau of Gender Affairs, and all who in any way or form contributed to the development of the bicameral caucus of women parliamentarians. This is indeed a historic moment for Jamaica. Madam Speaker, it was a game changer over the weekend. And I think as women in Parliament, we have a better understanding and a better appreciation of each other. So it will be a delicate balance between the nuances of our politics and policies on both sides of the political divide, not to mention the dynamics of our relationship between us as MPs, regardless of gender. So this will not be an easy task, but we are willing to give it a try. And we are willing to work together. Madam Speaker, Kofi Annan said, gender equality is more than a goal in itself. It is a precondition for meeting the challenge of reducing poverty, promoting sustainable development, and building good governance. So, to my sisters in both houses of Parliament, founders and the promoters of the first bicameral caucus of women politicians, I say a big thank you for pledging to the commitment to see beyond partisan lines when the need arises I know it is not going to be easy. It will not be easy. But we must commit to working it out and going through the process until we work it out. In fact, I know that we can play a critical role in this parliament in being that mediator between the men. These are indeed sober times. Therefore, we must understand that sustainability relies on our deep commitment of time, energy, and visionary leadership. Yes, we have achieved important indicators for women's rights in this country, thanks to the efforts of both administrations. Government comprised of members of the People's National Party and government comprised of members of the Jamaica Labour Party. We have achieved. We have achieved. But we still have more to do. We have to reference ourselves as models of leadership. We have to stand to shine a light across the country, to walk with confidence, knowing that when you see that little girl in Jamaica who tells you that you are her role model, you can look her in the face, straight in her eyes, with much honesty, knowing that you sit in this honorable house to create opportunities for her self-development and promotion, and not just merely a symbolic reference for her. To the men, we crave your support, and we give you our commitment that we equally care about you. Madam Speaker, it is my sincere hope that we can continue to put Jamaica first as we center the needs of women and girls in the parliamentary setting and in an enabling environment which we now ask for support. Madam Speaker, I thank you very much for your indulgence. I thank my colleagues. God bless you. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, thank you so much. Let me first of all thank the Minister for the motion that is before us and for the statement that she has just presented. I want to probably just speak generally for a little bit, observing my few minutes. Jamaica has, we always talk about Jamaica being a little bit tallower, punching above her weight. And often when we talk about that, we do talk about it in sports, in music, and in culture. But for any of us who have had a conversation about life in Jamaica, politics, or Jamaican women with anyone overseas, we would also know that Jamaica is looked upon as one of those countries that has made significant strides in terms of women's empowerment and gender equality. And therefore, there is no doubt that the work we do today and where we find ourselves today is because we have not made that journey alone, but that indeed we have stood on the shoulders of others. So whether we go back and talk about maternity leave with pay or equal pay for women, the Status of Children Act, from the establishment of the Family Court, the Women's Bureau, the forerunner to the Bureau of Gender Affairs, whether it was about the National Daycare Program or the Women's Center, or Domestic Violence Act of 1996, or Property Rights of Spouses Act of 2003, or whether it was a recognition and focus on early childhood development, or Child Care Protection Law of 2004, or the Registration and Security of Daycare Centers in 2005, or Sexual Offences Act, or Values and Attitudes Campaign, or Offences Against the Person Amended Law, or Incest and Punishment Law. If we look at all of those, we would see just how long this journey has been. Many of these groundbreaking and far-reaching programs, policies, and legislations really have been done by others. But more importantly, it has been done through collaboration, not just with any government of the day, but also collaboration with our faith-based organizations and with civil society and our international partners. And that is the foundation on which we stand today. It therefore has not been by accident some of what the minister has spoken about in terms of where we have seen women participating, whether it is in education, in the judiciary, in civil service, in middle management, whether it is around our first female prime minister, whether it is around the female president of our People's National Party, or whether it has been about the general secretaries, party chairs, in terms of females in those positions across both parties. So we stand on good ground, very, very good grounds. What we have recognized, though, in looking at where we are, is that even some of these laws that were so profound at the time at which they were passed, when we look back at where we are internationally, changes are required. When we also review these laws and see the gaps in implementation, for example, we recognize that changes are in fact needed. And we would have seen the start of many of that. We completed the sexual harassment bill, for example, going painstakingly over the provisions and looking at what 2021, 2022 required of us as we looked at that law. And so I believe that in this, as we celebrate Jamaica 60, and as we also celebrate the International Decade of Persons of African Descent, 2015 to 2024, which is focused on the full engagement of economic, social, cultural, and civil and political rights of all people of African descent. At a time where in Central and Latin America, we have also seen individuals of African descent taking their rightful place, acknowledging and recognizing their rights, and making sure that they have the constitutional protection of those rights as Afro-Latinos. I believe it is a good time for us in Jamaica to now be considering the establishment of this bicameral female parliamentary caucus, to begin now to look at something that we have always excelled at, we have always seen as important, but which requires some additional work today in 2022. In fact, I often say that with all the progress that we have made and with all the work that is still left to be done, we also need to make sure that not only are we looking at international benchmarks and what's happening externally, but that we also are looking at the cultural reality and what that demands of us here in Jamaica in terms of how we make sure that we bring our women, men, girls, and boys into this century with full rights. You know, we talk a lot about the history that we have made as in the Parliament in terms of a record 28.5% of women in both houses. And I am pleased to be part of that history. I am pleased also to be part of a history where on this side of the House, our women are 29% of our members. Yeah, because sometimes when we talk about it, we don't see it in those terms. We also, 29%, we may be small in number, but I want us to acknowledge the contribution that we are making to the historic percentage of women in Parliament. In the upper house, it's 50% of our members that are women. Yeah? Let's not ignore that, and let's not diminish or undervalue the significance of that. And I think it is important because there's so much work to be done. The minister spoke about the retreat that we had over the weekend and the work that we have done there. And I also want to put on record my real sincere gratitude to Parliamericans, to UN Women, to the Bureau of Gender Affairs, and to the minister herself for the work that has been done to take it to this point. Minister pulled a group of us together a couple months ago, and we started the discussion around this particular act of getting a bicameral female parliamentary caucus. The weekend showed a couple of things, yeah? It showed that we have to be courageous. And in the courage that we show of our own convictions and how we see what is happening and our recognition of the role of women and what needs to be done in terms of that balancing, that at the same time, we also need to be open to listen to the other point of view. Because often in the cut and thrust of what we are doing, we believe that our position is the only truth that there is. And I believe what it showed in those moments of courage, of vulnerability, of steadfast position, of listening, is that it is going to, one, take time to build a trust that allows us to be honest and open about the issues that confront our women and what our position need to be in their defense. And I say that because I know how often persons have come to me as a member in the House, and I suspect to many of you as well, to say, what happened there? How could you? Why didn't you? And so I believe it is important for us to create that space, for us to be able to have those kinds of conversation. Of course, as you said, we have never been able to do it alone as women, never. We have always had to rely on allies. And in this journey, we also would want to count on our allies inside the Parliament, our male colleagues. We also would want to count on our allies outside of the Parliament as well. Civil society, faith-based organizations, and other multilateral and international organizations who are willing to work with us as we chart this path to improve our own capacities as members in here, to apply a gender lens to policy, to legislation, and so on, and also as members of the caucus for us to be able to bring the issues, the programs that confront our women, our girls, our boys, our families. I mean, when we look at gender-based violence, you know, sometimes when we say that 1 in every 4 Jamaicans has experienced intimate partner violence, that's bad. But when you look at the other piece of statistic that says that 1 in 4 Jamaican women have been sexually abused by someone other than her partner. Yes? It tells that they know. Yes, that they know, but who is not their intimate partner. So it is not just about those that absolutely. And so it is not something that we can take for granted. It is not something that we can afford to make into a political football. And it is not something that we can allow our political allegiance to supersede what we need to do for Jamaican women and families. It is not going to be easy because we don't really have that tradition. The tradition we have of this two-party system is to cling tenaciously to the positions of our party and to defend it right down the line. We cannot. I said we, and I said that that is the tradition we have. No man, when you tease me, you know me, I go answer. We cannot afford to allow that. We have to have the courage. But we also have to have the courage to recognize when we simply don't agree. Because we see things from different perspectives. Because that happens too. I tell persons that I am a strong advocate for women's rights. But I'm a mother of 4 boys. And I live in a Jamaica where I also know what people take cost you. All when it not goes so. How they make it up. Because they know how it will be seen by others. And so as we go through all that we do, we can't ignore both sides of the coin. And as I end, I want to really encourage everyone to support the motion that's before us, for it to go to the Standing Orders Committee. And I certainly am looking forward to the work that we will have to do, working together, open to seeing things through the perspectives of others and from the position of others. As tenacious as you know, I normally hold my own views. But the truth is that especially when we have access to data and to research, that will help us not just pull the decisions from out of the air, but that it is evidence-based and data-driven, which is a position on this side that we have taken as kind of the holy grail about how we make decisions. I think that that is really, really where we need to be. And with that, I just want to say I was pleased to be part of the group of women coming out. And I wanted to place on record one of the greatest takeaways for me is that when you hear individuals say something that you find doesn't resonate, yeah, where there's a dissonance, for you to really stop for a second and drill a little deeper, not to react, but to ask, where did that come from? What does that really mean? So that you're in a better place to respond. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I am no bandwagonist. Some years ago, I had the good fortune of being a representative of this Parliament to Pan Americas when they staged a very dynamic conference promoting gender equality. I was too, Senator Longmore and myself represented Jamaica. And when they announced the Jamaican delegation and they saw a man amongst the delegation, they said Jamaica had indeed arrived. Progressive. And I was most fortunate. Madam Speaker, for me it was an eye-opener because at that conference a lot was shared with us, and I do feel proud as a Jamaican of our achievements. It has been noted already of the greats who have led the way before us. And some names have been mentioned, and of course, this month being Sister P's birth month, we have to salute her in a very special way. And continue to pray for blessings as she goes through this difficult period. Madam Speaker, I did say I'm no bandwagonist, and the member who spoke before me knows that in my own constituency, I believe that our women are not only the hardest worker, but they provide tremendous leadership in the constituency. She will tell you that when persons were saying that only men can become subcontractors on government projects, we led the way in advancing our women to show that they could lead on construction projects. And they led much better in many cases than men, because they tend to be fairer and they tend to be fearless when it comes down to the distribution of work. So I really want to applaud the whip of this parliament for bringing forward this motion. Our member from St. Catherine Eastern, unfortunately, is not well today, and I'm so happy that the deputy leader will allow her to participate next week, Tuesday, when she returns. But I wholeheartedly support the motion and to pledge on this side, if the leader doesn't speak, the men's full support for moving towards greater gender equality in our parliament. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much. It's amazing that you said that and rose to speak, because I had a discussion this morning with the representative from Pal Americas, and she said what would make it so progressive is if you had the full support of men in something like this. So certainly we are ahead of the game with that. And she was even saying when Pal Americans are asking for delegations to come, she wants to say it's not just women, persons who are part of the male population. So we are progressive and leading the way. Member.
Madam Speaker, I rise to address this Honourable House on my own participation in the Women's Retreat this past weekend in Ochorea, St. Anne. It has resulted in my own support for the establishment of a women's bicameral parliamentary caucus in this Jamaican parliamentary structure. I wish to update the House that for several months, almost a year, we as women have been meeting from time to time, and it has gotten us to the point which we are convinced that it really requires a strong team of women from both sides of the aisle, both sections of the parliament, senators and parliamentarians all working together for this absolutely most fruitful and progressive direction for Jamaica. Madam Speaker, Jamaican women have faced numerous challenges historically, which has actually resulted in us having a well-honed appetite for resilience. That says a lot. In fact, Jamaica's historical and current realities narrates a story, a powerful story of women acting in concert with other women, uniting around common challenges and strengths in an interest of the wider community, and thereby bringing about significant positive change in the lives, the lived experiences of every Jamaican man, woman, and child. It is in this context of this proud legacy that I have declared my own full support of this bicameral Women's Parliamentary Caucus in the House of Representatives. I want to remind, in joining Minister Grange, the task is one of facilitating networking. We are expected to build solidarity and promote constructive dialogue on issues of importance among women parliamentarians across both sides of the aisles and in both chambers. capacity building, assisting caucus members with professional development opportunities to further strengthen their capacity to participate in the legislative as well as governance processes. Raising awareness, bringing a focus to gender equity and the value of greater visibility of women leaders in all spheres of life and in all sectors of society. Fourth, promotion of gender equity. This will be done through the mainstreaming as well as gender responsive budgeting, Minister Clark, and costing as important tools in our parliamentary work. Legislative review. We're required to undertake reviews to further advance the legislative process, select legislations as they come up. The aim is for this caucus to put on our new gender lens so that we can engender equity in our legislations. We are required to take a serious hand in helping the society to understand the differential impacts of proposed changes in laws and policies through our new shiny gender lens. Last but not least, advocacy, our job, engaging in advocacy and lobbying on specific priority policies, themes in accordance with national objectives, outlining the general work and work plan of the caucus. So let me use this opportunity, Minister Olivia Babsy Grange, Member of Parliament. You're giving me a lot, because it's a lot. A long list of litany behind your name, Minister. Our international partners at Parliamericas, the Spotlight Initiative, UN Women, for achieving this very important milestone in Jamaican parliamentary history. Honorable Olivia Grange has always created opportunities for all women in politics, young and old. She has helped to create an environment in which we can coalesce around what unites us, to be in the process of politics or the rigors of parliamentary life. It is because of this habit of bringing the minds together that she was best able to achieve many of what my colleague parliamentarians dubbed this historic weekend as absolutely historic in parliamentary life. First time ever in Jamaica. As colleague women on both sides of Parliament, we shared and continue to share deep concerns about the state of violence that often manifests itself, particularly in domestic violence, violence against women and children, as well as in the Jamaican context, a general propensity for aggression in our country. The data tells us that domestic violence actually has lifetime implications for every single individual impacted. We should therefore be comfortable in accepting and be comfortable in admitting to a problem deeply, deeply rooted in our cultural norms, our traditions, and our values that does not undermine our mission in this current administration to fix and to resolve. We should equally be comfortable in the fact that admitting to the gravity of this problem manifests the desire to foster meaningful partnerships of equity intended to build Jamaica, land we love. At our retreat, I made a special request, and I heard Minister Mallow Ford whispering across to Minister, saying the same thing. We are going to be taking up the task. We're calling on all of us to jointly look through all the current legislations and assist each line minister in identifying for their respective ministries what are the initiatives under the Spotlight Initiative that we need to pay attention to, all in an effort to give the support that is necessary to the responsible line minister for gender affairs. Madam Speaker, my attendance at the retreat was truly a learning experience for me. It inspired and energized me to further commit in amplifying people-centered concerns on our parliamentary agenda. I am very optimistic that our future of Women Bicameral Caucus will give long-standing, long-lasting results. It is expected that we will continue to have naturally divisive issues on which we will caucus. We had sometimes heated conversations over the weekend. However, in the end, we are mindful that even if we have some rough patches, once we are trusting of each other, genuinely open and honest, and make up our minds that on both sides of the divide, we are the ones who are gifted with the opportunity to take Jamaica and its women forward. And as a matter of fact, for me, I learned it was more than just about women and girls when we spoke about gender. It is every single one of us, because we're all impacted. So we do have one particular issue that we found very politically charged. And once again, when we caucus as women, I would say, let us take the politics out of that particular issue, because it is an issue of violence that affects us from the top of our society all the way down to the least educated, the least well-off person in Jamaica. Let me leave it at person. I'm therefore using this opportunity, Parliament, to call on not just our women, but we ask our men in this House to reaffirm your commitment to the noble calling of service to the people of Jamaica. May we work together to strengthen the development of Jamaica in an inclusive way, so that Jamaica, the one we continue to shape, will become a better Jamaica for our children and our children's children. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, the member for St. Catherine Central and Minister of Gender Affairs, who piloted this motion, has asked that we suspend the debate on this until tomorrow, when all right, so the member is suggesting that we postpone to next week. So we move, Madam Speaker, that the debate be suspended until next Tuesday, the 13th, when the opposition spokesperson on gender affairs will make her presentation, and then we conclude the debate. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
The question before the House is that the debate be suspended on the next week, Tuesday, the 13th of December. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. The debate is now suspended. House Leader, where do we go?
So, Madam Speaker, may I invite you to ask the Acting Prime Minister and Minister of National Security and Member of Parliament for St. James Northwest to take the Zozo motions, notices of which he gave earlier. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Dr. Chan?
I now move for the suspension of standing order to enable me to take the resolution note of which I gave earlier.
For the House is that the of which he gave earlier. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Dr. Chan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To my colleagues, Madam Speaker, the zones of special operations represents one of government's most comprehensive and coordinated long-term to medium-term approach to crime. The clear whole-bill approach enables us to simultaneously enforce the necessary suppression measures while strengthening the security, social investment and physical redevelopment of our vulnerable communities. Madam Speaker, the zones of special operations have generally not been a point of contention for this House. In fact, it reflects what happens when we unite around matters of national interest and in particular issues that is so deeply and directly impacting the lives of our people. Across all the communities where zones of special operations have been declared, the residents have been vocal about its benefits. As a matter of fact, just yesterday, a resident in a particular zones of special operation community expressed strong concern and discontent at what they thought was the dismantling of the zones of special operation in the area as some redeployment was taking place in that particular community. The transformative change in these communities is real. The zones of special operations are bringing about lasting, meaningful and impactful change to the lives of these residents. Acting on the advice of the National Madam Speaker, in the true spirit of the zones of season, that is peace and goodwill to all Jamaicans and in accordance with the requirements on the law reform, Zones of Special Operation, Special Security and Community Development Measures Act 2017, we are seeking to further extend all 7 areas currently declared as Zone of Special Operation, which will all expire on the 22nd of December 2022. I must pause at this to comment, Madam Speaker. I hope that I think we have sent the instruction now to CPC, am I right, Madam Minister? And we'll have the amendments to the zones of special operation that was decided in the Joint Select Committee. But part of that will be reported on a 6-monthly basis. Even though we will be introducing new areas in due course in the particular vulnerable areas, I think it is the nature of this particular legislation, the unison in which we approach it, will determine that it's better to report on a 6-monthly basis when we can do effective review of the operations in these areas, which I said has brought significant benefit to the communities and is a model piece of legislation for intervening in vulnerable communities in any community, in any society. And we look forward to its expansion to the various areas that have been identified by the Planning Institute of Jamaica. I would comment to at the point that I mentioned it to the Minister of Finance too. As we review, you will realize that it takes between $400 and $500 million per community to really impact what is happening there. And that's the kind of numbers required over maybe about 30 communities. And the Minister of Finance comment was that it's the kind of money we cannot afford not to have. So I look forward to that as we go forward. But I certainly would love to see the amendments, because bringing these documents every 60 days can be a little bit tedious and not necessarily in the best interest of what we're doing. However, acting on the advice of the National Security Council and in accordance with the law reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures Act, in accordance with Section 5 of the Act, which guides that the Prime Minister in Council, after consultation with the Joint Command, may by order, subject to affirmative resolution of the House of Representatives, extend the period referred to in Section 4.3, the Mount Salem, Denham Town, August Town, Greenwich Town, Norwood, Parade Gardens and Savannah zones of special operation, special security and community development measures to be extended for a further period of 60 days. A very short review of the activities, Madam Speaker. With respect to the operational and community building strategy, the zones continue to transition along the clear, hold and build spectrum. Mount Salem and Denhamtown will continue into the build phase. Greenwich Town, August Town, Norwood, Parade Garden and Savannah will continue the whole phase for this period of extension. As we move to the next phase of extension, let me reiterate that zones continue to yield positive results. As of the 4th of December 22, for the period prior to and during the declaration of the respective zones, areas under the zones of special operation continue to record a reduction in all major crimes. The ministry papers outline highlighting the activities with respect to the community building strategy being undertaken in the phase have been laid in the House for review by all members. Madam Speaker, I'll provide a brief update on some of the activities underway in these committees, although we have laid the ministry papers. Given the advanced development states of the Mount Salem zone, activities are principally around the consolidating and completion of activities towards the sustainable development of the community. So far, the Social Intervention Committee has managed the implementation of over $300 million investment in Mount Salem. The priorities and the work plan are all implemented, and only a handful of residual activities remain for the community. The committee will continue to provide oversight until the interventions are complete, and in fact will continue to operate in a different capacity in what will be the new Mount Salem after the zones of special operation is completed. The Development Committee resulted in the investment of some $20 million being directly managed at the community level. This created some increased job opportunities for residents, whilst increasing governance and accountability. The Social Intervention Committee, on the other hand, continues to engage and provide critical guidance to the sustainable build-out of intervention within the Denhamtown community. With over $450 million invested, the zone has had a tremendous impact. The overall work plan remains on track, and the Social Intervention Committee will continue to monitor and provide updates. And the leadership in that committee continues to demand that we retain the zone of special operation within that community. A number of other activities at the build phase will be taking place during the course of the next 12 months, so it will in fact be going through the transitional phase at this stage. Though the zone of special operation Greenwich Town has had the single largest period of public investment, the Social Intervention Committee continues to monitor the implementation of key social investments within the community. The current investments that are under active implementation are Enterprise Grant, Phase 3. Indeed, in this particular grant, I pause to make note the fisherman who we sought to give his engine indicated to me, I'll have to go and visit him, however, that he is making a contribution to the community, and so the member of Parliament is aware, and we're very pleased. Again, showing the character of our people when given opportunity. Right? ICDP Solid Waste Management Cycle 2, infrastructure upgrade and safe passages. The work plan for the community as well as the community priority plans indicate there is need for additional investments. These are being identified and the required allocations are being considered. August Town continues to show promising results. The Social Investment Committee continues to engage and provide critical guidance to the sustainable build-out of intervention within the area. With over $200 million committed to date, the zone remains on track and will achieve its intended objective of safer and better community. The Norwood zone is earmarked for significant build-out of much-needed infrastructure, including supporting the rehabilitation of road and water supply. In the interim, several short-term initiatives are being executed. Currently, there are approximately $300 million in approval projects to be implemented in the community. These investments are projected to be implemented over the next 12 to 24 months. On the infrastructure side, Parade Gardens Zones of Special Operations is still at the pre-development phase, with activities largely focused on identifying community needs for prioritization. The Social Intervention Committee is developing an overall work plan to identify the level of public investment required to address the developmental challenges in the community. The plan will be finalized in the coming months and the identification of funding confirmed. I'd also like to indicate that in a neighboring community, adjoining community really, the private sector, working in collaboration with the various MDAs of government and the police, have initiated a special project, one of the special star projects in the Rose Garden area, which I said borders this particularly, and we look forward to significant transformation in the central Kingston area as we progress in both as under the zone of special operation and with the private sector and the coordination of the various government MDAs that operate in the downtown area. Similar to the Parade Garden zone, the Savannah Mile zone remains in the pre-development phase with the formulation of critical priorities for the community under development. Notwithstanding this, there have been selected interventions to support the community in interim, namely some 68 cleanup activities which saw improvement in the physical landscape of the community, operation certification, which some 86 residents from the community were processed for new birth certificates or for the issuing of birth certificates, as they had none before. A baseline assessment of the community was implemented through the PIOJ. Madam Speaker, these are short indication of what's happening in the 7 zones and of what stage they're at. Of course, the zones of special operation is not the only social intervention or social investment being carried out by being led by the Ministry of National Security. But the objective of all of these programs is that while the Ministry of National Security plays a leading role in conjunction with the PIOJ to identify and operate in these areas, the objective is to ensure that the programs are embedded in the agents of government serving and therefore become sustainable and continuous over time. We have currently initiated a 135 schools where we're looking at using the schools, working with the Ministry of Education, as models or as gateway to the community, where we can interface with the entire family by identifying with the students coming to school and working with the Ministry of Education, students from basic school through to primary school, and begin the process of intervention and diversion of young citizens away from the potential gang culture that engulfs these areas, and a number of other activities that will seek to work in conjunction with the Planning Institute and the relevant agencies, especially through the Citizens Business Council, which operates, which continue to operate. Madam Speaker, we remain confident that the zone of special operations are transforming these communities and the lives of the citizens of these residents in these communities. The government remains committed to providing opportunities for our most vulnerable citizens. Madam Speaker, the whole of government approach being implemented is crucial. We must continue to utilize all available legitimate resources to disrupt criminal gangs, apprehend the killers, and transform the life outcomes of our most vulnerable. Madam Speaker, I thank you and will seek the support of the members of the House.
Yeah, thank you. It's on. I want to thank the Minister again for the presentation as we consider the extension of the ZOZOs that are before us. And yes, as Member of Parliament for our constituency, where we do have a ZOZO in place and several other checkpoints, given the nature of activities in the community over several decades. I am pleased that we do have one. The Minister made a mention of some of the activities that are taking place, including the assistance to businesses and entrepreneurs, including the fishermen in particular, and so on, and that was really welcome. No problem. And that really was welcome. Welcome by the youngsters who were part of it, as well as some of the older members of the community. Minister, I think until the issues are resolved, whenever we have these discussions, I am going to place on the table simple, joined up coordinated activities that should not require too much street lights. We can't have an area under Zozo where we know what the problem is, where we have the kind of absence of street lights that we do have. I don't know what else to do. I don't know what else to say. It just isn't there. And I believe that in as much as you talk about that southern band, yes, where we have these kind of issues, that working street lights must be a priority. And that shouldn't take a lot, because the Ministry of Local Government doesn't owe, as once was the case, any large back money to the JPS. And so that's fine. Everybody owes current once you're in business. Yeah, that is the nature of business. You pay as you go. But the point is that the JPS must be held to account to maintain the existing street lights. Too many of the street lights in that zone are not working, and it is a threat, a risk to persons in those communities. So for me, that's a big one. I could not come in Parliament and go back to Southwest St. Andrew without talking about East Avenue. Our citizens have been patient. Nobody spoke with them, discussed it with them when we turned East Avenue one way, going from Marcus Garvey Drive to Spanish Town Road. It was done not because of crime and violence or the Zozo. It was done ostensibly because there was work being done on Spanish Town Road for the pipeline, and we needed to have the diversion of traffic and so on. And the community had great displacement and inconvenience, accepted it, embraced it. That work is now over. I don't know if people, Minister, I don't know, I need to take you through the community from one point to another so you understand the difficulty in exiting the community when East Avenue is one way, what is that, south? It used to be a road two-way, which means you could come out of any of those streets, go right to access Marcus Garvey Drive, go left to access Spanish Town Road or Maxfield Avenue. It is not possible. I have told the residents that any day they pick up a placard and go out onto the main road to demonstrate, just prepare one for me, because I will be right there with them. Because I believe that it is unconscionable. We have written to the authorities. I have written. The councillor has written. The councillor has raised it in East Avenue. East Avenue. The councillor has raised it in the Kingston and St. Ange Municipal Corporation. I have raised it here before. It needs to be addressed. If it is that it is a security issue, why you would want it to remain that way, I think we owe the citizens the decency of saying so.
Yes, Minister Mallow. Report.
Madam Speaker, I rise to support the 7 law reform zones of special operations, special security and community development measures, extension of period of operation resolutions for Mount Salem zone, the Savlamar zone, the Norwood Community Zone, Parade Gardens, Denham Town, Greenwich Town, August Town. Madam Speaker, my support is that the resolutions be affirmed and that the period of operation of the zones be extended as indicated in the orders. Madam Speaker, I should also like to use the opportunity to report that on Friday last, I had the distinct pleasure of being in the Mount Salem zones of special operation. As you know, Madam Speaker, I have the privilege of representing in this honorable house the residents of the Mount Salem Zozo. I have the distinct pleasure of representing the people of the Mount Salem Zozo. But you know, Madam Speaker, permit me to extend commendation to JISTV as the implementing agency for the Zozos. Under the leadership of Mr. Omar Sweeney, Commander of the Order of Distinction, the work of the zone, the work in the various zones, I believe, have provided much source of joy to the people in the zones. We celebrated in the Mount Salem zone 5 years of operation, and there was a Day of Excellence hosted by the Mount Salem CDC in conjunction with the JISTV. Permit me also to commend the Mount Salem CDC and the leadership of the CDC for excellent work done. I was particularly struck by the report from JISTV that every cent handed to the CDC was properly accounted for. That is not always the case. But you know, Madam Speaker, I had reason to retrace the steps and contextualize the work of the Zozo. And I couldn't help but reminisce on the level of skepticism that existed when we were embarking on the Zozo. And as I looked back on all the reports and, you know, the decrying of the Zozo, it was said that myself in particular were embarking on an abuse of the rights of the people and a number of negative things. But you know, Madam Speaker, everyone present in Mount Salem was singing the same tune, that it was the best thing that happened. There were no abuse of rights. The challenges as they arose were dealt with. The officers were professional, and you recall that human rights training is part of the legislation. And I stood there with such mixed emotion because it was a reminder that we need to have faith. We may not immediately understand or buy into the vision of the government in its efforts to deal with the crime problem, to deal with the development problems, but that what we are doing is thought out, is really thought out. And a lot of the concerns that people need to have raised have turned out to be unfounded, because the way the zones have been operationalized, today the call is for more zones, and I think it is something that the government is looking on. But I say that to make the parallel because we have other security measures that we're dealing with, for which it's been difficult to get buy-in in the parliament on. But the people who live in these communities are experiencing the benefits that are derived from the various operations. And as we move to extend the period of operation, I just want to say we need to heed the lessons learned from the zones, that not every fear will be realized, that the government is not embarking on any mission of abusing people's rights, but that every day the conduct of the criminal element impair the exercise of rights by ordinary Jamaicans. We have become prisoners in our own homes because we can't move freely. And you know, Madam Speaker, I'm just delighted, extraordinarily so, on behalf of the people of Mount Salem, to see the positive difference that the operations of the zones of special operations have made in their lives, and the transformation, and that without exception, everyone in the community hail the success, the overwhelming success of this law reform initiative. So, Madam Speaker, I support the resolution and I look forward to they being affirmed. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, as I rise also to support the extensions of the zones of special operations, special security and community development measures. But Madam Speaker, while giving some support, it is something that I've asked on more than one occasion through you, Madam Speaker, to the Minister. Because as much as the zones of special operation carries a community component to it, that the reports that are generally tabled here gives an indication mainly on the community development measures that have been implemented in these zones. And as the speaker before me has mentioned, is that the first zone was implemented in 2017. What would give a good indication of the success of the zones, Madam Speaker, is if we could get an indication of how many of the violent producers have been arrested in these zones, because how many gangs have been disrupted in these zones, to be able to determine not only the success of the infrastructure and social development, but of the success of the police, seeing that the regulations that have accompanied these zones of special operations give some autonomy and some extension to the police itself in dealing with the matter of crime. So, as I would ask the Minister if, when giving a report, if we could get an indication of the success in that area in the matter of disruption of the criminal elements within these zones. Because as we speak of the SOEs, as we have in many debates dealing with the SOEs, have given an indication, as you have in the past, that the police themselves have certain powers within these zones, and it would now give us an indication of the success outside of the community development measures. Because when you look at the report, Minister, many of these measures have been coming from the inception, especially those in the Mount Salem, those in the Denham town. But there are one-off programs in some instances. What is the likelihood of continuation of some of those programs, dealing with the heart, dealing with the whole issue of the birth certificates, dealing with the one-off grants that have been given to small and medium-sized businesses? Have we followed up on the success of these businesses, and how many more within that local can get support for the success of those individuals within the zone? So, Madam Speaker, through you to the Minister, if we could get an indication on the crime fighting side when these reports are given, or if the Minister can give some indication in these matters, because these are the same areas that are the SOEs have been called. So is it that the crime fighting measures under the ZOSOs have failed? Why it is that you then have to call a state of emergency in these general areas?
Minister, yeah, I just wanted, as I rise to support the extension on the ZOS, I just want to ask a question. As I listen very carefully, my sense is, one, given your own expressed concern about the traditional methods of community investments, is this a new template for determining these methods of and types of investments? And are you satisfied that as you're implementing the ZOSO, the lessons the appropriate lessons are being drawn so that what emerges is a template that can be applied as you continue the effort to roll out the community development elements of that, of the ZOZO, across other constituencies. And may I ask, are the components of the ZOZO, the community development element, are they different in different constituents, in different ZOZOs, or are the same prescription being applied across each of the zones? So that, in effect, if they're really intended to be laboratory of learning, that we're in fact learning other aspects of it, of the ZOZO, so that we can in fact develop, learn the lessons and to develop the template so that we can be effective in the application of these ZOZOs going forward.
All right. Let me thank the members for the support, but respond to a number of things. First, for the Greenwich Town area, and MMP, I think I had the privilege, in fact, of meeting with my own social investment committee on Friday evening, and a number of issues should be dealt with there, but I'll ensure they follow. The street lights, for example, is crucial. It's not a government agency that operates them, but that one can be dealt with through representation with JISTV. The roadway East Avenue, I will ensure that the team has discussion with NWA for the restoration of two in that area. The comments, and I will relate it, well, comment on the issue of activities in the region as it relates to the SOE and the question of a proof of concept being raised by the member from Western St. Andrew. But for the impact of security, we have had data on it. I'm sorry these reports did not carry them. I'll ensure they are brought to you and make a note, and on the next occasion, even get them to you before. There have been significant changes. Given, of course, the zone tends to be confined to a very select geographical zone. And in some cases, you get dispersion. In other cases, you have had people returning. And the case of Mount Salem, where the members just spoke from part of St. James, you have had what has happened is that while there have been a return when there's less aggressive, what appear to be less security activity, I think there have been significant increased cooperation with the police in the area, and most of the actors who have come there have in fact been reported to the police. And I think one of the most recent, most notorious individual just was reported that just skipped bail and migrated, and that's some very peculiar circumstances. We in fact expect to get him back here, but he's from that area. He was held accountable for some 9 murders, although they had evidences on 2, that one of them, in fact, was apprehended almost immediately after the incident. So they have good reason. I think it's not only 9 murders, there are several possession of illegal firearms. So there is, I think, not only reduction, but over time, an improved cooperation with citizens. There was a demonstration in the 2 of the zone in Kingston yesterday asking for the retention of the zone. There have been the rate of, or should I say, the increased level of cooperation I expect in one in particular, which had a long history. Chances is still mixed, but I think there has been significant improvement, and we expect to continue. The issue of SOE overlapping, yes, it has to be, because it would mean isolating these small communities and take them out. And some of the security features are overlapping. It's a matter of extending it across the region. The zones of special operation is more in keeping with a social development model. And the object is to ensure that we institutionalize the services. For example, the issue of dealing with the schools in a special way. We have, in fact, identified some funding to start a 1 in 35 school program, which will reach out to a number of schools in the corporate area largely, and in the Southern Crescent, which you refer to by the member from South St. Andrew, to begin to work with the Ministry of Education, not as a project outside of that. The Minister is here. We have an extensive discussion how to use the school as a gateway into the community. When we identify the challenged individuals, we not only work on the community, but we work with the families to relieve some of the challenges that they have in terms of enterprise to make the parents independent, get the children the social support required through PATH and other activities that are specially designed to ensure that we can restore the individual, so to speak, in the community. There will also be extensive social services. We're having a challenge with that, which is critical to what we do in the medium term, to get social workers and psychosocial services to the challenged families, because most of the Jamaican students who do psychology will not do clinical psychology, and we're having a great challenge recruiting the required clinical psychologists, where we want to launch a program on a much broader scale. But we have designed the program, and we are investing in the program, and we expect to resolve the issue as we go forward, but it's not going to be as quickly as we'd like. So the issues, the zones are providing lessons on social intervention, how we can intervene and how we administer and correct the problems to bring sustainable changes to those communities. Member from Western St. Andrews, I know you have a challenged community. The person that I'm looking forward as we come out of this period of tight budget space, coming out of COVID is still tight, but the minister has operated and managed his budget in a very effective way, and we'll be looking at more opportunities for the vulnerable communities and more communities that are on the list to be addressed in a very comprehensive way. But, Madam Speaker, I now move that we move for the affirmation of the resolution listed. All 7 areas that was identified earlier in my initial presentation, and the resolution moved, Madam Speaker. So I seek the support of my members, and thank for those. I move that the motion be affirmed, Madam Speaker.
Members, the question before the House is that the motion.
The motions. Yes. Aye.
Have it. The motions are approved. Doctor.
Madam Speaker, the final item on the subject of public business will be the presentation from the Minister of Finance on the second supplementary estimates, motions of which he gave notice earlier. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
So yes, but he's.
No, we don't. Madam Speaker, I now move for, with respect to the Charities Regulation 2022, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
The question before the House is that the standing orders be suspended to allow the Minister to take the motion, notice of which he gave earlier. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. Minister.
Madam Speaker, in 2013, the Charities Act, which seeks to implement the government's policy to introduce a single piece of legislation that provides for the regulation of charitable organizations and establishes a comprehensive legal and institutional framework for that purpose was passed in the Houses of Parliament. In order to give effect to the purposes of the Act, there is need for the promulgation of regulations to further strengthen the operational and legislative framework. Further, Madam Speaker, Jamaica is seeking to be compliant with Recommendation 8 of the Financial Action Task Force's international standards by ensuring that the supervisory authority for the non-profit sector, which is the Department of Cooperatives and Friendly Societies, the Charities Authority, is appropriately empowered to undertake effective monitoring of those charities that are at risk of being abused for terrorism financing. FATF is a global standard setter and promoter of policies for anti-money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism and proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. The FATF Recommendation 8 requires that the laws and regulations that govern non-profit organizations, I would just refer to them as NPOs going forward, be reviewed to ensure that the legal framework for regulating NPOs at risk of being abused for terrorism financing applies focused and proportionate measures in line with the risk-based approach to protect such NPOs from terrorist financing. In Jamaica, NPOs include charitable organizations falling under the remit of the Charities Act. As such, it is necessary for the introduction of these regulations in order to put measures in place to ensure that these charitable organizations are put in a position to protect themselves from being used for money laundering or other financial crimes, and that the Department of Cooperative and Friendly Societies has the appropriate authority to monitor the sector. Therefore, Madam Speaker, the Charities Act Regulations 2022 before us is being promulgated in accordance with Section 38(1) of the Act, which allows for the Minister, in this case is the Minister of Industry, Investment and Commerce, to make regulations, and these regulations were introduced in the Senate and were passed in the Senate and have come to this House for passage, or for, not a passage, for approval. For the Minister to make regulations subject to affirmative resolution. These regulations include, among other things, provision for the following: additional details in relation to the application for registration as a charitable organization and the renewal of a certificate of approval. So you need more information on the persons who promote the charity and who operate the charity. The designation of protected charities, i.e. charitable organizations that are assessed to be at risk of being abused, and regulatory controls for same. See, the verification of donor identity and updating of donor information. So the days when you can just give money to a charity without having a record of the donors and keeping that on file so the DCFS can inspect, right? That's just bringing Jamaica up to standard with global standard of these things. Procedures for transaction verification and training to be provided to the authority to protect charities, as well as duties of charitable organizations to maintain donation records and practice record-keeping procedures. Prescribed form and fees for operation services and H offences and sanctions. Madam Speaker, charitable organizations have featured in some of the more disturbing cases over the last several years, and they'll remain nameless. But I think you, with some effort, can recall what I might be speaking to. Madam Speaker, I will now, and hence the urgency for getting these done. Jamaica has obligations to the FATF to have these regulations strengthened and approved. Madam Speaker, so I'll now do a clause-by-clause review of the regulations. Regulation 1 provides for the short title. Regulation 2 defines the key terms used throughout the legislation, including agent, associate charitable organization, and conflict zone in relation to a jurisdiction, means a zone where a terrorist group is exerting control, or that is within close geographical proximity to jurisdictions with active terrorist groups. There's also a definition of donor-recipient relationship or designated authority. It means the chief technical director of the FID. donor information, and protected charity. Part 2, Madam Speaker, provides for additional details on the procedure and requirements for the application for registration as a charitable organization, the renewal of the certificate of approval upon its expiration, and the applicable fee. Part 2 further provides for the prohibition of the use of certain names, titles, and words by organizations not registered under the Charities Act. So if this wasn't there before, you can't use certain words in the name of an organization if it is not a registered charitable organization. This part also outlines the particulars of the certificate of approval issued by the Charities Authority, such as the period of validity, the registration number, and the terms and conditions. Madam Speaker, Part 3 provides for the following. 1, the designation of protected charities by the Minister on the recommendation of the Registrar of Department of Cooperative and Friendly Societies. Let's bring it up here. After consultation with the designated authority, the Commissioner of Police, the TAJ, and any other relevant department or agency. So it allows us to identify protected charities that can be dealt with differently. The program's policies, procedures, and controls that are to be established and implemented by protected charities in order to, among other things, prohibit the fraudulent diversion of charitable donations intended for legitimate charitable purposes to prevent the commission of financial crimes. The procedures to prevent any protected charities from forming donor-recipient relations or from carrying out a one-off transaction with any donor unless certain criteria is met. The procedures for the verification of donor identity and the updating of donor information. 5, the requirement for protected charities to carry out due diligence procedures concerning donor information and to assess its risk in relation to money laundering and being abused for terrorism financing. 6, the requirement for the protected charity to confirm the identity, credentials, and good standing of its beneficiaries and associate charitable organizations, to document the identity of their donors and ensure that information relating to the donors be treated with confidentiality and made available upon requested authority. The transaction verification procedures that are to be maintained by protected charities is also included. And 8, the procedures where a donor to a protected charity is a body corporate. This includes the duty of the person charged with receiving the donation in a protected charity to carry out reasonable due diligence procedures concerning the identification of the body corporate and transaction verification, and provide satisfactory evidence of same in their record. So a charity receiving donations has the duty to ensure that the entity providing the donations provides basic diligence information. Again, these are standards that obtain internationally, and the challenges of being a developing country is that you don't develop evolutionarily. You are required, as part of the international community, if you have to access to the international financial system, to have standards that are compatible, or else they'll block your ability to access the financial system. These are the realities, my colleagues. But this is good for Jamaica, clearly. Okay? This is necessary for Jamaica to be the kind of place we want it to be. The 9th thing that Section 3 deals with is a requirement in respect of any wire transfer for the person conducting the wire transfer to ensure that the protected charity receives and includes in its record accurate and relevant information on funds transfers, including the correct name, address, tax identification number, and account number of the persons involved. And again, this is all geared towards ensuring that when the authorities want to, if they, for whatever reason, want to probe, they can't turn up to office and you hear that no information exists. You're required by law now to have that information if you are going to be given the privilege of operating a charity that's registered under the Act and the regulations. Part 3 also requires identity verification procedures where any donor-recipient relationship or one-off transaction is being carried out by an agent of the donor, and the requirement for the governing board member of the protected charity to maintain proper accounting records to demonstrate that all charitable donations received and monies dispersed for the financial year have been used in a manner consistent with the protected charity's purpose. The requirement as well for the governing board member of a protected charity to cause its members, its employees and relevant officers to, within 6 months after the date of commencement of employment and every 2 years thereafter, receive training on, amongst other things, the compliance of the operations of a protected charity with the provisions of the Act and on the risk management and financial control procedures. It also has a requirement for the establishment of internal reporting procedures of protected charity. And Clause 14, the prohibition on a protected charity from permitting any donor to conduct any transaction with the charity by means of a numbered account, anonymous account, or any account in a fictitious name. 15, the requirement for the charity's authority to, in compliance with the FATF recommendations, provide guidance for the implementation of due diligence procedures and the relevant training of the governing board members, relevant officers, and other employees of protected charities. Clause 16, the requirement for the governing board members of a protected charity to review the activities of its branches and subsidiaries outside of Jamaica to ensure compliance with the Act and regulations. But Clause 17, the non-derogation of the authority's power to suspend or revoke the approval of registrations of a protected charity where such charity fails to comply with any provisions of the Act. And Clause 18, the appeal of the decisions of the authority to the Charities Appeal Tribunal. Madam Speaker, Part 4 is the general provisions with respect to all registered charitable organizations. Provisions relating to a registered charitable organization. This part provides for the treatment and operation of any entity that is registered as a charitable organization. This includes provisions in relation to A, persons appointed by the authority to audit and examine the management, operations, finances, and accounts of the institution. B, the prohibition on the use of a charitable organization for any purpose other than its charitable purpose. Use of donations. This part stipulates the requirement for any donation that is accepted by or on behalf of a registered charitable organization to be applied in accordance with the regulations. The part also establishes, so you can't have funds in a charitable organization and use it for other purposes. It has to be used for the stated purposes of that charity. The part also establishes the requirement for the registered charitable organization to notify the Commissioner General in writing of any refund of a tax-deductible donation. An offence is created for contravention of this regulation. There's a duty to maintain donation records. This part provides for the duty of the registered charitable organization to maintain records and specifies how such records are to be kept. The duty to the donor. This part provides for the duty of the registered charitable organization that conducts a fundraising activity and the procedure where a commercial fundraiser is engaged by a registered charitable organization. Duty to furnish documents. This part stipulates the requirement for a registered charitable organization to furnish the financial statement, report, and other documents complied by the auditor within 3 months after the end of each financial year. Power of the authority to inspect records. This part provides for the requirement of a charitable organization to provide an inspector during an inspection with a free copy of any extracts from any books, records, and documents which the inspector is entitled to inspect. Financial statements and audits. This part specifies the particulars that are to be included within the audited financial statements of a registered charitable organization. This clause also provides for the organization to cause the financial statements and accounts of the organization to be audited annually by an auditor who is a registered public accountant or chartered accountant, and the requirement for the charitable organization to change its auditors at least once every 5 years. Obligation to secrecy. This part establishes the obligation that every person having an official duty or being employed or who was employed or to whom information is communicated pursuant to the regulation has to regard and deal with as secret and confidential all information relating to the functions of the registered charitable organization. This clause also provides for the applicable offence for contravention of this section. Offences. This part specifies the offences for any persons who willfully commits any action that would obstruct the operation of the provisions of the regulations and provides for the applicable penalty. Offence by unincorporated body. This part indicates the liability of a governing board member, officer or employee of a registered charitable organization that has not been incorporated. Transitional provision for pre-existing donors. This part applies the obligations of a registered charitable organization to any donor in respect of any donor-recipient relationship formed by the registered charitable organization prior to the relevant date, which is the date the regulations come into effect. Madam Speaker, through the construction of the Charities Act, we give tremendous privilege to charitable organizations in Jamaica who are able to assemble funds, raise funds on a tax-free basis where donors get a tax deduction on the donations made. We also allow registered charities to import items free of duty and to generally conduct themselves without an obligation for taxation. They also don't pay taxes on any surplus that they generate in any particular year. It is incumbent upon us, therefore, to ensure that charitable organizations act appropriately and in keeping with the intent of their founding and the intent of the charities regulation. Around the world, and indeed in Jamaica, when regulations with respect to charities are loose, it permits charities, given the leeway I just described, for being used for nefarious purposes. And there are many examples in Jamaica and overseas where this risk has materialized. And it is for that reason that in the peer review process of Jamaica's architecture, this weakness was pointed out by the Financial Action Task Force. And given the obligations Jamaica has, the treaties and agreements that we are signatories to, we are obligated to plug those weaknesses with the regulations that were introduced by the Minister of Industry, Investment and Commerce in the Senate and which are here before us. These regulations definitely ask charities, donors, recipients to operate according to a higher standard, and that transition will be challenging and will be difficult, but it's a transition that we have to make as a responsible global citizen. You will note that certain financial institutions don't want to deal with charities because these kind of regulations are not in effect, and therefore they believe they are not protected. What we will find is that with strong regulations, such as these that are going to be in place, the ability of charities to operate within our and to gain the confidence of service providers, financial service providers and others, will be greatly enhanced. Madam Speaker, we have a commitment to FATF to have these regulations approved in Jamaica. As I said, they're approved in the Senate, and they just need to be approved in this House, which will allow us to fulfill a very important obligation to the Financial Action Task Force. And the only remaining legislative action now would be the changes to the Companies Act to update the beneficial ownership regime, which will be coming in the new year. I now ask, Madam Speaker, the House to, obviously to hear first from the opposition, and then I will ask. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, the opposition is not against the proposed changes that are being made, and we understand the motivation and the need to comply with international standards. The concern that I have is primarily for what I would call the small, genuinely based charitable organizations that have been in existence for a long time, that don't generate a lot of income or resources, that have very small personnel, and the level of administration and cost that is going to be required to comply with these standards. I know you're trying to go after the people who abuse it, but unfortunately I think the ones who are compliant are going to have a difficulty meeting the requirements and actually may not be able to meet these requirements. They may have to take on additional staff, whether accounting, etc., which may be beyond the very limited resources that they have. So I'm not objecting to what is being proposed, and I understand why it is being proposed. I'm just expressing a concern for those organizations who I believe may struggle. But I do believe it is important to go after the loopholes, and like you, I know there are individuals and organizations that are abusing charitable status to do all manner of things. I don't know whether in that regard, with the concern raised, whether there is an opportunity for the oversight body to, I don't know if it is to provide training, to provide guidance for those charities to get to a point that they can comply with the regulations.
Minister, it really, for those of us who have been either a part of or have been observing the movement in the international arena and how those have been brought directly into the domestic arrangement, it really was just a matter of time before we come to this kind of discussion. And my concern really is that I think we can appreciate that there will be adverse impact of these regulations operating in the current situation that is Jamaica today. Because the raising of the standard will mean, as was mentioned earlier, that there will be some of these charities who historically have not either abused, but more importantly have made a contribution in various spaces. The question and concern I have is that all of this is happening at a pace and at a time when the education and the opportunity for training is such, I get the impression that that is a limited space, limited time, and that the fallout in consequence can be significant. And more importantly, perhaps most concerning to me is that the directors of some of these directors of these charities are usually, as I understand them, usually elderly people, many retired persons who really use their time to support these charitable organizations. And the threat or the prospect of having this sort of draconian law hanging over them is enough for them to simply say, look, this is too much worries, we're not interested, we won't continue to play this role. And therefore, you really, not only will it have a shift in standard, but a whole culture change will come about, and therefore we have to anticipate fallout in all of this. I don't know if we've done anything near a sort of impact assessment to see what these regulations will do to societies like ours, where there's a need for additionalities in so many areas, health, education, a range of areas, of social areas. And the roles are significant. Now, I want to ask, just to be clear, so this is the charitable organization. What about the friendly societies? Is there a sharp difference there? Is there any difference? And what are the likely impact or implication for the friendly societies? That's one. Second thing is the registration that will occur. You have seen, Minister, I've shared it with you about, because it spoke to a concern that I've had for a long time about the ruling with the European Court on the whole question of registration and the Data Protection Act for individuals. Are we paying close attention to that? I'm looking forward to the amendment to the Companies Act when that comes. But it seems to me that it has been recognized that even as we pursue this legitimate activity to plug these loopholes for anti-terrorism and money laundering, that there is nevertheless a balance to be struck. There are sensitive areas and concerns that are legitimate, and that at least the European courts are saying, look, you may be going too far. So I just want to, and we need that balance more than anything else, because these are likely to disrupt, interrupt, and displace a number of our, not only weaker institutions, but that we don't have the well-heeled kind of economic arrangements that allow for these strong charitable organizations. As I mentioned, as I understand it, most of them are really conducted by elderly and people who are retired. All of that now, it seems to me, this is intended to create a sea change, at least a cultural change in those arrangements.
Madam Speaker, thanks to the members for their contributions. I share your concerns. These regulations are such that it will be very difficult for micro charities to have the administrative infrastructure to meet the requirements. There may have to be innovation where firms pop up that provide this service, right? Not to one charity in-house, but provide it to many charities. That might have to be the solution. At a future date, as with poker, we came back, many years after poker was first formed, to introduce a de minimis amount in terms of opening bank accounts that would have lower KYC requirements. We call them low KYC accounts. That is, the account has less than a certain amount. And it was very small, like $200,000. That was the innovation after the experience of finding that the way, poker, which we had to do at the time, it was done, I think, under your time. The experience was that it was counterproductive to the financial inclusion agenda. We may yet have in the future to address this particular issue, but in the short term, the solution might have to be service providers who emerge that provide a service to multiple organizations. The other thing that probably will need to happen outside of the sphere that we operate in is that you're going to probably have to have mergers of charitable organizations, right? The idea that every activity, somebody want to have a bake sale and they start a charity, proverbially, that is no longer going to be an efficient way of doing things. And we're going to need charities that have scale to be, and to operate. So I definitely share the concern. I have, like many people here, I have experience. Yes, go ahead.
You mentioned the low KYC requirements. So couldn't you introduce something similar where below a certain threshold that the charity would not be required to comply with all of these requirements? I don't know what the number is, but obviously I think it's something that you could work out. Because really what you're going after are the people who are abusing it, who are using it as a channel to fund other activities beyond the charity.
Yeah, so I introduced that analogy, but you remember the analogy, the amendment came like 10 years after we implemented it, meaning when you're on a when you are in the position that Jamaica is in, we're on a proverbial gray list, you don't emerge from it by having carve-outs. You have to just implement it and do our best with it. And when we have credibility on the issue as a country, we can seek to make amendments that don't run afoul of the international requirements. But where we are now, with the microscope placed on Jamaica in this regard, and really with the aberrations that have occurred, it is necessary for us to implement it as is, or else we won't emerge from the grey list, and nobody wants that. But I mention it to empathize and to communicate that I share the concern, and to also communicate my hope that in the future we may be able to do something similar to what we did with poker. But that would be after discussions with, some of the international guardians of this kind of regulation, just to make sure that it sits within the fabric and doesn't do any injustice to the overall objectives. With respect to the friendly societies, they fall, the charities regulation addresses charitable organizations. That's my understanding. And friendly societies would probably, that's on the way. Friendly societies are not, we don't have friendly societies popping up today, but we have historical friendly societies. And I think they're under a different regime. That's my understanding. I could be wrong. Right, cooperatives, yes. So there's an act, where another piece of reform, but it's not under the FATF umbrella. But another piece of reform is the Credit Union Reform Act. That's not the name of it. And the Reform Act for cooperative societies. That is still in the drafting stages, advanced drafting stages, and will come to the House at some point, hopefully within the next 18 months or so. With respect to though it's not on this topic, I'll take an opportunity to answer it. With respect to the Companies Act and beneficial ownership, yes, there was this court case recently, but what that case was about was saying that having the requirement that all beneficial ownership is automatically public, that violates certain other important principles. And so that will be borne in mind when we bring the amendments. But, Madam Speaker, I now ask that the resolution be approved. The motion be approved.
Members, the question before the House is that the motion brought by the Minister be approved. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. The motion is approved.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you, members. Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion regarding the BOJ monetary policy statements and the quarterly monetary policy reports, that they be referred to the Standing Finance Committee.
Members, the question is that the Minister be allowed to take the motion, notice of which he gave earlier. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. Go ahead, Minister.
So, Madam Speaker, the Standing Finance Committee to which I referred, the proposal is that it meets next Wednesday, the 14th of December at 2 p.m. Yes, and this was being responsive to the requests by members, particularly on the opposition benches, to have sufficient time to be able to engage with the governor when he appears. So the agenda next week, Wednesday, is pretty light otherwise, and will allow for full engagement when the governor appears December 14th. And this will be the second time this year, Madam Speaker, which is, the governor has appeared twice a year, and, significant development for Jamaica. So, Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier, with respect to the second supplementary estimates.
The question before the House is that there's a suspension of the standing orders to allow the Minister to take the motion, notice of which he gave earlier in relation to the second supplementary estimates. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. Minister.
Madam Speaker, I now move, be it resolved that the second supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2023, which was laid on the table of the House on the 6th day of December 2022, be referred to the... Well, before I do that, Madam Speaker, let me just, I should say that, just permit me to just a few paragraphs on it. Yes, you have it in front of you. Madam Speaker, I'm tabling the second supplementary estimates for the fiscal year 2022-23 today. The second supplementary estimates primarily address the allocation of amounts previously captured under the contingencies in the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service Head across other ministries, departments and agencies to facilitate implementation of the new compensation system. The Government of Jamaica, having reached agreement with 17 unions and staff associations on the structure of the new compensation system, is proceeding to the implementation phase of the process. The effective date for the new compensation system is April 1st, 2022. The government is seeking to commence implementation this month with the payment of arrears and new rates to some groups. To effect these payments, the required resources need to be reflected in the relevant heads, and that is what this second supplementary estimate seeks to do. The second supplementary estimate transfers $30.4 billion from the contingencies activity of Head 20,000 to the various ministries, departments and agencies. It should be noted that not all groups have settled, and therefore, unfortunately, a third supplementary estimate will be necessary to complete the allocation of resources to facilitate full implementation of the compensation restructure. Madam Speaker, the second supplementary estimates also provides for a one-time payment in additional subvention to the local authorities and the University Hospital of the West Indies to assist both to meet their operational expenses. This amount is $1.7 billion. This increases the central government budget for the fiscal year to $973.7 billion. The $1.7 billion in additional expenditure will be covered by additional revenue projected at $1.8 billion, as the revenue performance has improved modestly since the tabling of the first supplementary estimates. So, Madam Speaker, you want to respond?
Madam Speaker, the supplementary by itself is not controversial. The Minister had signaled that he would need to bring it to make the allocations to the various ministries in order to make the payments. The concern I have, Minister, is that we are on the eve, probably a week and a half or 2 weeks away from making these payments. You have settled with, I think, somewhere between 60 to 70% of the public sector. But we are yet to find out what the specific details are of the compensation review. And I mean, you have asked for patience in the process to negotiate, etc. But I would think at this stage, the public has a right to know exactly what will take place in 2 weeks' time. Yes, workers know they're going to get an increase, but the specific details are still absent. And for me, at this stage, I find that difficult and really unacceptable at this stage, 2 weeks before payments are going to be made. And in line with that, Minister, I have a couple questions related to the payments to be made. One, is it that all groupings within the public sector who have already signed on will receive what I would call a retroactive payment in December? Are there any groups who have signed on who would not receive it? And then secondly, for the groups that have not signed on, I know you're advancing some monies to those groups. Could you indicate the amount and the basis on which those advancements are being made, and which groups would receive those advancements?
Madam Speaker, we might as well just pass this second supplementary right here. But just on the first set of comments, the process really is for us, the government, to agree with the unions for the new salaries to be represented in the Establishment Act, for the Act to come here, and then for payment to proceed. we are seeking to facilitate members who have already signed with a payment at this time because of the nature of the time that we're in. It is my full intention and my commitment that upon finalization with all of the groups, and the new Establishment Act is going to be brought to this House, where the salary of every single position will be detailed and tabled in this House. I would ask that we don't make perfection the enemy of the good. The reason why we are making the payment here is simply because we want to, it would be much better if we did this after everyone has signed. That would be the easiest and cleanest way to do it. But unfortunately, given the fragmented nature of the bargaining process, that, as desirable as that outcome is, it's not one that can be practically achieved. So what I am asking for and advocating is that when we, and I'm hoping that we will be, let's see, but let me be hopeful, optimistic, that we can be complete before too long, or by complete I mean substantially complete. And at that point, we will bring the new Establishment Act to Parliament, which anything I do outside of that would be, the Establishment Act, I don't know if you remember it when it comes each year, is a big book that has every single ministry and all the positions in the ministry and how much those salaries are. Complete. And it has everything in there. I ask that we wait, otherwise it's going to be piecemeal. And I don't, on a reform like this, I don't want to be piecemeal about it. So if that is what I'm kind of putting forward. With respect to the question, that you asked, we are seeking to make the arrears that are now due from the 1st of April until the current time available to those who have signed. And that is the policy intent. Okay? Now, getting that done is very challenging. As you see, it's challenging for us here. It requires us to table a supplementary one day, have standing finance the next day, and PAAC the next day, and pass it the next day. Similarly, it's going to require similar gymnastics from other ministries, departments, and agencies, including the payroll department of the ministry concerned. And my hope is that everybody does their part. And if everybody does their part, then those who are within groups who have signed should be in receipt of their back pay from April 1st until the current time. With respect to some of the advances that you mentioned, as news circulated that we had signed, and it's now 17 groups, and it will quickly increase beyond that. We have had written requests from employees of public bodies, from unions representing employees of public bodies, and from the employers in public bodies, i.e. the management, requesting that they have had to wait while we conclude with central government due to no fault of their own. They're pretty much ready to go. All that's required for public bodies is a mapping of jobs to a spine, which is a process that is detailed and tedious, but not one that ought to be protracted and lengthy. And in light of that, they have requested approval to pay an advance pending the finalization of that mapping exercise. The Ministry of Finance and the Public Service has approved public bodies to pay such an advance. And this would be public bodies who are not on the consolidated fund and who are not receiving the full amount of back payment, right? Because as you understand, public bodies on the consol fund will be they will be like civil servants in central government receiving back pay from April 1st to December. But those who are not on the consult fund, we have granted them approval to advance amounts up to a maximum of $100,000 to members of their staff in public bodies, pending the finalization of the mapping exercise, at which point the full amount of the back pay would become due.
So it only applies to employees who would be in public bodies. So any civil servant not in a public body, not in a grouping that has already signed, they would not be eligible for that advance. That's correct. Okay.
Yes, that's correct. It's public bodies and the one or two executive agencies, which function in much the same way. And the principle being that we have a fair understanding of what the final results will be, because there's a big overlap. Many of those are not represented by unions, and those that are, there's a big overlap between the unions who have already signed, and not a perfect overlap, but a big overlap between the unions who have already signed and the unions in representation of many of the public bodies. Not a perfect overlap, but a big one. So we have a fair idea of what the final figures are likely to be, even though to calculate it to the person, that will take a little more time. And the view is that the employee should not, we're trying to accommodate the employee who has waited patiently and due to no fault of their own. That part of the exercise is not yet completed.
And just to confirm, so any grouping that would fall under the umbrella of having signed, barring the administrative challenges which you have outlined, those persons should receive their back pay in December, barring the administrative challenges.
Yes, but administrative challenges is everything. So barring administrative challenges, right? So as minister, that is the policy intent. But we're going to need hundreds, if not thousands, of people to do their part of the job, right? To make sure that indeed happens. So it's a big undertaking, as you can understand, and you are contributing. Grateful to you by accommodating the swift consideration of the second supplementary. So, Madam Speaker, I now move. So we don't have to have the discussion tomorrow, Madam Speaker. It don't look that way. Huh? Well, the truth is, it's a one-issue supplementary, basically. It's taking money from a contingency and spreading it to all ministry departments and agencies for the payment to be made. It's ought not to be contentious. It's a December to remember kind of budget. Huh? So, Madam Speaker, I now move, be it resolved that the second supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2023, which was laid on the table of the House on the 6th day of December, 2022, be referred to the Public Administration and Appropriation Committee of the House of Representatives for consideration and report.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, I've had opportunity to dialogue with the chairman of the PAAC, and the chairman has agreed that the PAAC will meet tomorrow, Wednesday, December 8th at 7th, Wednesday, December 7th at 10 a.m. And Madam Speaker, on behalf of grateful members of the public service, civil servants rather, thanks to the chairman for accommodating the meeting tomorrow, and to the members who serve on the committee. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, indeed.
Madam Speaker, there's a matter which we would seek your response, and indeed, yes. for the recommittal of the item announcements. So also allow the clerk of the House to make an announcement.
Members, I now seek the suspension of the standing order. Those in favor of the recommittal of the item announcements. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Members, I now seek your leave for the clerk to withdraw the Jamaica Gazette Supplemental Proclamation, Rules and Regulations, Volume 145, number 297, dated Tuesday, December 6, 2022, and number 298, dated Tuesday, December 6, 2022. Is it the wish of the House that these be withdrawn? Those in favor? Is it the wish? Wish? It is the wish of the House. The ayes have it. Madam Clerk.
The Jamaica Gazette Supplement Proclamations, Rules and Regulations, Volume 145, number 20, number 297, dated Tuesday, December 6, 2022, containing the emergency powers, parishes of St. Anne, Clarendon, and St. Catherine Regulations 2022, and the Jamaica Gazette Supplement Proclamations, Rules and Regulations, Volume 145, number 298, dated Tuesday, December 6, 2022, containing the emergency powers, parishes of St. James, Westmoreland, and Hanover Regulations 2022, and now withdrawn.
Madam Speaker, it is not intended to do any further business for the day. I therefore ask that you adjourn this Honorable House until tomorrow, December 7th, at 2 p.m. at the George William Gordon House. Madam Speaker, whilst on this motion for adjournment, I'd just like to indicate to the House that it is intended to conclude the business of the House for this season on the 14th of December, and the 14th of December, next Wednesday, following the presentation by the Governor of the Bank of Jamaica on the report of the BOJ. Madam Speaker, it is our wish that the meeting on the 13th, that members do pay some attention to their attendance on that day, and with that we begin as per usual promptly at 2 p.m. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Members, ask that you take note of the request of the House Leader for our meetings next week. The question now before the House is that we do adjourn until tomorrow, Wednesday, the 7th of December at 2 p.m. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. This House is now adjourned.